I'm frustrated by President Bush, who I think
Right.
needs to say something beyond the inferences that he made. And um I look back at his second inaugural address, which was a radical
Mm.
address in American foreign policy in terms of how he talked about democracy and how America would spread it in the world, and he's been silent.
Mm.
That being said, um, he
And
has
why?
a
Why?
he has a strong conviction, right? And I think this is one of the things that's gone so off the rails in the country, right? Is the notion that nobody, it seems, can appreciate anyone else's conviction, right? Without the harsh judgment
Mm.
and come to the conclusion that it's in good faith, right? So I think this is misguided, but I think he believes former presidents should not be political or partisan figures.
Yeah.
And I think that is true, except for in the
Yeah.
extraordinary exigent
Yeah.
circumstances.
This is an
I-
emergency.
right? That being said, maybe it's the case, and I literally can't think of another person in America, and I mean this very seriously. And I know we're going to have a left-leaning audience watching this as always. And this is a remarkable facet of
Mm.
all of this. The most popular politician in the country, right, of national name ID is probably George W. Bush right now,
Mm.
from the disappearance over the last years. I, Tell me a person other
Mm.
than George W. Bush or some person who has credibility or more authority to be the person who comes out and says, this guy lost, she won,
Mm.
stop the madness.
Mm. Mm.
Is there another person in any conceivable out of the 340 million of us who's a higher card than him to walk out?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, we're running out of people who haven't happy to say, taken a stand, right? I mean, it's disappointing that Mitt Romney hasn't, by the way. And what I understand that he said was that he wanted to somehow ensure his place within the Republican Party in the future, and so he's chosen not to. I mean, that's he's been I think a positive voice in this period in general, but he's surely fallen down in this moment. And look, we do look at, and I'm going to get to your question in a second, but we do look at somebody like, well, I mean, maybe the most important of this period, which is John Kelly, saying that this guy is an admirer of Hitler and he's a fascist and know it. And I've been that close to him, so you can in essence, you can trust what I'm saying. So I think that's been meaningful. And I think the Harris campaign has done a pretty good job of voicing the warning that represents in ads and otherwise. As we can easily say, when a candidate like Donald Trump has to say, "I'm not a Nazi," um, overtly, there's something wrong in his campaign when it becomes necessary to say that out loud. And I think there are still a solid majority of Americans who recognize, this is a bad thing. We're living in so much of an upside down world. It's, the normalization of the crazy and the patently wrong and dangerous is, the willingness to go along with so much is, it remains stunning. And I think that's why, you're voicing warnings, my trying to voice warnings in whatever ways I can has been, as much as anything to remind people to know what's true and what's not true, what's right and what's wrong, what's normal and what's just insane. That's needed to happen. So the point is, to the extent that choices have already been made, whose side are you on? For democracy, not for democracy. We are running out of characters at the national level. I was going to say that, just in terms of endorsements, I think that the endorsement by Taylor Swift may be as important as any other endorsement that's happened this whole election season, just because it made a lot of young people register and pay attention in a way they may not have otherwise. Um, I couldn't actually, I'm racking my brain if there's anybody besides George Bush who may be more important as somebody to say, you lost, cut it out. But let's play that forward. Let's say that he finds his voice and chooses to be that person. What happens then?
Well, the question I was asking earlier about the delivery of the no,
Mm,
and probably more importantly, its receipt.
mm,
I don't know how that manifests itself and how it looks like, right?
right.
If we're going to have millions of people on the streets, right? If we're
Mm,
going to have violence, right? What Kamala Harris says, right? What her leadership in a
yeah.
decisive moment would be. But I want to come back, right? Because I think one of the things to unlocking this and kind of understanding is to talk about fear.
Mm,
So let's talk about Mitt. And I ran a campaign against Mitt. For McCain in the Republican primary, and my involvement in that was Mitt had asked me to run his campaign for president. I said no. I was on Team McCain. Team McCain blew up. And I wound up being really the volunteer leader of the campaign, right? I was never an employee. I never got paid,
mm,
and the thing about Mitt, when you're running a campaign about him, he's an honorable guy,
yeah.
right? And he's a funny guy. If you
Yeah.
spend time with him privately, he's an observational genius, right? He picks out like the absurdities of the room. He's an ethical guy.
Mm.
Um,
At a time when
the knock
honor
on
and
Mitt
ethics and
has always been,
decency,
is he a tough guy?
yeah.
Has he got a spine? Right. And so when you read Mitt Romney's latest story that McKay Coppins covers, right, it's remarkable.
Mm,
This is the 2012 Republican nominee for president. And he's talking about, with a real sense of despair and I think legitimate worry, like legitimate fear. And he says, I can't protect my 40 grandkids.
mm,
Right? I can't. He he's afraid.
yeah.
Jeff Bezos is afraid,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so there's this moment. I think it's one of
No
the
matter how many, I mean, let's just say, no matter how many billions you have, we have learned that they don't serve as a bulwark against that fear and the capacity for a gangster to intimidate.
common element is fear of loss,
Mm,
that you coercively can take from me, and that emotion, right, should not be discounted because it's felt by the second richest guy in the world versus the 30-year-old woman with no agency on a question of her reproductive rights.
yeah.
It's the same thing, right? It's the same fear that you can take from me. So how you respond to the fear. And I think this is very important
Mm,
in the moment. And one of the stories I think it's important for Americans to know in really a decisive event in the final end story, right? That last act three of the Cold War is the selection in Rome of a Polish Pope
mm,
who goes to Warsaw in front of 1 million people in the rebuilt square occupied by the Nazis, the destruction of the city, the occupation by the Soviets. And
yep.
this is steeped in Catholic catechism and theology, but but there's a huge political context to it. And John Paul says, do not be afraid.
Mm.
And he electrifies the country. And so there's a moment coming
Yeah. Yeah.
where the do not be afraid message and how we process fear
Yeah.
is going to become very, very relevant in American life because, as Timothy Snyder talks about, what you'll see if Trump wins is this very seismic, rapid capitulation,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
To get in line and get out of harm's way, so to speak, because there's safety in the herd.
yeah. But look, that's I think why it's been, and we might in some ways minimize it because it was so positive how many Republicans, high-profile Republicans, who made a decision to speak out about the danger that Trump is and to take the next step and endorse Kamala Harris, as the only candidate who's committed to the rule of law and the Constitution and to, the all Americans. And, that started out very, very slowly. I'm thinking about, probably a few people, I'm forgetting her first name, Hutchinson, who spoke at the J6 committee and talked about Trump and, Sarah Matthews within the administration. I mean, a handful of people that worked closely enough with Trump that their words mattered. And look, that the abuse and the assault, and I'm sure the death threats that followed, and I'm sure to this day have continued, is something that they chose to absorb in their decision to not be afraid, and that steamrolled, expanded and has become a population that's given, permission for so many Republicans. And look, I mean, a permission structure, Liz Cheney and Dick Cheney that helped to create a permission structure where Republicans could stand up and say, that guy doesn't represent my country. He's a danger to our Constitution and our way of life, our rule of law. This cannot stand. And, to me, that's already a building movement of be not afraid. And look, I mean, I hear you loud and clear. We know how many people rolled over awfully quickly when Trump won the last time. People who had been insulted in the most, grotesque ways, the Ted Cruzes and the Marco Rubios and so forth, attacking their families, abusing their, a spouse or a father, all of that. And they, Lindsey Graham is another, grotesque example of that for whatever collection of personal or political reasons he's chosen to roll over. But, you know, I think that the amount of work that's been done to not be afraid by so many people who have reason to be afraid gives me confidence that whatever way this plays out, that the level of resistance and in essence, speaking truth to power is going to be strong and reliable and meaningful.
Do you ever sit back and I do like, and I don't think there's a lot of circumspection about this like right now, but like we got here to this place. How can it be
Mm. It
that
still is stunning.
that that the country looks out at the Democratic Party and comes out basically as we sit here 5 days out on the 50-50 proposition, right? What has gone off the rails in the Democratic Party that they have not sealed the deal with this guy?
Mm. Mm. Mm.
It's something.
Yeah. Well, it might be, look, again, we're back to, I mean, if we're just talking about, what does the American electorate think? I'm clinging to the notion that it might be a more overwhelming victory than the polls are saying so far. I'm optimistic still about that. Maybe that's my idealistic belief in the American people, but it's based on, a lot of data that goes beyond the polling itself in terms of levels of enthusiasm, the favorability ratings of Harris and Walz, the deeply unfavorable ratings. I mean, it's +5 essentially for Harris and Walz. It's -17, -18 for Trump and Vance. People don't like them. Those things are meaningful. I think the cultural momentum is on their side. The stupid things that Trump has done with, well, just the last day, the garbage truck stunt that was, I don't know what he thought it was supposed to do, but it's a real self-own for the guy who's called America a garbage can, the guy who's called everyone around the, Harris, absolute garbage. Um, it's hard to believe that it could be as close as it might be. But I think there's, that groundswell is going to be, is going to be meaningful. And maybe I lost
One of the
ultimately the
things we're
question you're
watching,
after.
I was going to ask, like, one of the things we're definitely watching is the total collapse of the
Ah,
credibility of
ah,
news media and everything in this.
yeah,
Like, I think, I mean, I find the coverage as a general proposition to be corrupt and appalling.
yeah.
Right. Just appalling, right? There's not a word for it. How do you see that?
Oh, well, I mean, whether it's open complicity or whether it's just the traditions of journalism where you treat impartiality as the highest value. I mean, that's been a terrible danger in a period where, one side are essentially arsonists setting a house on fire and the other are, trying to, keep the house functioning. Do you say these two things are equal and you simply cover both sides? So it's, one, it's this, impartiality, or as it's played out, the sort of both sidesism where you treat these two equal. I think it's also this tendency to just sort of say what happened and think that you're doing the job, right? So Trump can lie through his teeth, and rather than providing a clear picture of why he's lying and why that's not reliable, too many times he just gets to say what he wants to say without pushback. And I think the related thing is that the media as a whole has failed to be able to describe the urgency, the emergency, the stakes of things, right? And the need to be able to do that again and again and again. So, don't just chronicle what happened, don't just sort of tell us what both sides think. Tell us what it means. Tell us what the context is. Speak truth to power, because that's the responsibility, and understand that journalists, every single journalist needs to be, and I'm going to use this phrase, every single journalist needs to be and has needed to be a pro-democracy advocate.
Yeah.
They live in a democratic society. They have a responsibility, I think, to uphold that society. So if it's being undermined, destroyed, put in danger, at risk, there's a responsibility that goes along with that, and it's been abdicated. And the traditions of the profession have assisted that. And that's I think part of why we're in this problem.
I'm Steve Schmidt. This is The Warning, and I invite you to subscribe on our Substack, on our YouTube channel. Follow us. Welcome to the community.